Let's take the full frequency range of this audio signal and split it into 3 parts or bands for the low, mid and high frequencies. Now let's give each band its own dedicated compressor with its own controls and only affecting the band it's been listening to. Congratulations, you now know what a multiband compressor is. But when, why, and how would you use one? This video is sponsored by DistroKid. Follow the VIP link in the description down below to get 7% off an already amazing price to distribute your music to the world. Before learning about multiband compression, I think it's a good idea to have a good understanding of compression in general. If that's something you've struggled with in the past, then I highly recommend you watch my easy to understand video linked in the description down below. Many people who watched that video commented that it was the first time that they truly understood compression. Now, I'd like to get started here by talking about the problems of normal compression that multiband compression actually solves. So if we take a look at the waveform of this acoustic guitar, we can quite easily see some significant peaks or spikes. These are called transients, the loud part at the beginning of a sound, like a drum hit, a piano note, or in this case, a guitar strum. And it's the kind of thing you may want to control or tame with a compressor. Now, before I go ahead and try to do that, I want to have a listen to this acoustic guitar. And while we're listening, I'm going to pop up a spectrum analyzer so we can see what's happening across the various frequency ranges. Now we can see here there's quite a lot more energy in those low and low mid frequencies where we can see these spikes here, and it gets a lot less as we go up through the higher frequencies. Now this is going to be significant when it comes to setting the threshold of our compressor in a moment, because those low frequencies are going to contribute a lot more to the overall level, and they're going to cause the compressor to go above the threshold sooner, and the compression is going to kick in sooner. So let's go ahead and actually set up our compressor now. Now I'm using this isotope compressor today. It doesn't matter which compressor you use, but I'm using this because it can both be used as a regular compressor and also later on as a multi-band compressor. Now I've already set up things like the ratio, the attack and the release, so I just need to go ahead and adjust the threshold to actually get some compression. Now I've set this up for quite a lot of gain reduction at the moment. That's because it's just a little bit easier to hear for a tutorial, but you may in actual fact be using a little less than this. But this is good because we can actually really hear the compression. Now before we take a closer look at the compression, again I want to take a look at it on our spectrum analyzer so that we can get a kind of a before and after view. Let's have a listen. So pink is before and green is after, and we can see here quite a significant amount of gain reduction in these low frequencies here. But we've got exactly the same amount of gain reduction in the high frequencies, even these very high frequencies which were very quiet beforehand anyway. This is going to be very significant. This happens with all regular or single band compressors. Now a particular thing is also happening here, which we're going to hear a bit more clearly if I now add some makeup gain. So I'll do that now to get us kind of back to the same sort of volume we were at before. And let's have another listen, but this time I'm going to put it back to the waveform so we haven't got quite so much eye candy and we use our ears a little bit more. Now we're getting this kind of pumping effect with the acoustic guitar here, which I must say I'm not a fan of. Now, with some instruments and some styles of music, you may actually like that, but I want this to still remain reasonably natural at least, and that pumping effect isn't helping with that. Now, I could adjust the ratio. Well, it's not high ratio at the moment. I may even want it to be higher if I want a little bit more gain reduction in that low end, but doing that at the moment is going to make things worse. The attack needs to be fast because I want to catch those transients, and well, the release, to save you some time, I've tried various different release tactics, a slow one, a fast one, and you're going to get that pumping effect here regardless. So the significant thing here is that even though the low frequencies are contributing a lot more to the actual level of this instrument, all of the frequencies are equally being affected by the gain reduction. And those mid and high frequencies are frequencies that we're a lot more aware of with our human hearing, and we're really aware then that that gain reduction is kicking in and out through this performance. Now, there's a few different tactics you could use to try to cure this. Perhaps if you've had this situation, you've tried to use EQ and tried to get rid of some of those low frequencies. Well, the problem with that is you may actually want them to be there, particularly in quieter parts of the performance. You may want the warmth that they provide. Another thing you could do is use the kind of filters that you sometimes get on the side chain of regular compressors. Basically, what they do is they filter out the low frequencies so that they're not triggering the compressor as much, and that would be a reasonable approach here. However, I actually want the low frequencies to trigger the compressor. I just don't want them to affect the whole frequency range, and that's where a multi-band compressor is going to come in. Now, although my multi-band compressor at the beginning of this video had 3 separate bands, the reality is they can have as few as 2 bands or many more than 3, depending on the capabilities of each compressor. To keep it simple for this acoustic guitar, I'm just going to use 2 bands, and I'll create those by clicking at the top of the display here. And you can see now I've got a high band on the right hand side in yellow and a low band on the left hand side in blue, and I can adjust the frequencies where these bands begin and end by moving this slider at the top here. Now, as I do this, you'll see this blue and yellow line appears, and they're crossing over, and these are indeed indicating what's called the crossover. The important thing to understand here is that although each band has its own settings and will affect that band, they do have a slight effect on bands either side of them, and this just helps to kind of smooth things out. Now, I'm going to adjust this to around about 450 hertz so that my low band encompasses those low frequency spikes that we were seeing earlier on. Now, we don't actually have to use both bands here. We can actually turn off compression for any of them. So I'm just going to go over to my high frequency band and switch the compressor off, so we're only compressing the low frequencies. Now, one really important thing to note here before we actually listen to this is the settings for this low frequency band are actually exactly the same as I was using for my single band compression earlier on. And although they're the same, we're going to get quite a big difference in terms of what we actually hear. So let's have a listen now. Now, hopefully you can hear that that kind of pumping is pretty much gone, and you can see here why that is. Although we are compressing the low frequencies here and they were triggering the compressor, we're not now compressing those mid and high frequencies, and that's where we could really sort of hear that pumping. Now, that doesn't mean we can't compress those frequencies at all. If we go back to our compressor, I'll switch on the high frequency band, and we may choose some slightly different settings here. Perhaps set the threshold a bit differently, perhaps have a lower ratio, and maybe the attack and release times could be a little different. So let's have a listen or a look at a different result here now. So we're getting just a little bit of compression in those high frequencies, and that's pretty close to what I was aiming for. Perhaps the lyrics of this vocal part will tell you what the problem is. I'm singing close to the microphone, but now I'm further away. And it's quite a classic problem. The proximity effect is what happens when a singer moves close and further away from a microphone. It may happen because they move their head around, or it may happen because we've recorded this at a different time, perhaps a different day, and unwittingly they've set up at a slightly different distance. And the main component of this effect is the fact that the low frequencies are sort of really hyped when you get very close to a microphone. They're accentuated, and in this case I would say they're way too boomy. Have a listen again. I'm singing close to the microphone, but now I'm further away. And although that may sound nice and kind of warm in isolation, in a mix, those low frequencies in the vocal are just going to make it really muddy. So what we want to do in this case is kind of balance things out, have more evenness in this. So I've actually already set up my multi-band compressor for this. Again, just a simple low and high band compressor, and this is the result I've got. I'm singing close to the microphone, but now I'm further away. So not only have we got rid of the sort of muddiness of that first phrase, but it's much more even. It's not perfect, but it's much closer. Have another listen. I'm singing close to the microphone, but now I'm further away. Now, of course, in both of our examples, we focused on controlling low frequencies, but multi-band compressors can be used to control any frequency range that you wish. So, for example, a de-esser is really a simplified multi-band compressor, which focuses on that kind of 5,000 to 6,000 hertz range, where all the sibilants and that kind of annoying sound of a vocal might be. You might also, for example, want to control the cymbals on a drum bus and control them when they get a little bit out of control. The main thing is not so much when do I use it, but why do I use it? Think of this as a new tool that you've got in your toolbox, and now that you understand what it does and how it works, the next time you come up against a situation where you think, look, I want to have those frequencies present in this performance, but when they get a little out of control, I just want to suppress them a little bit, then that's when you would reach for a multi-band compressor. However, in a moment, I'm going to tell you about a situation where people sometimes set up multi-bands of a multi-band compressor and have them all on exactly the same setting. Why on earth would you do that? I'll tell you in just a moment. But first of all, I'd like to remind you that if you're releasing your music to places like Spotify, Amazon, Google Play, etc., check out the VIP link in the description down below to our sponsor DistroKid, where you will get 7% off of your first year of membership. In this example, we've got a multi-band compressor in a mastering chain, so it's going to affect the sound of the whole song. And we've got 4 active bands, roughly lows, low mids, high mids, and highs. Now, the interesting thing is here with each of these bands, we've got exactly the same settings applied. If you look at the bottom where the controls are, as I flick between each band, there's no change in the settings. This may seem like a little bit strange, and you may initially think, well, doesn't that just make it a regular compressor? Well, of course, kind of not, but let's find out why in just a moment. First of all, I'm going to play the song for a moment and take a look at the top where you'll see lines which indicate when gain reduction is happening in each band. And I guess Superman never really ever gave a damn about Lois Lane, the Daily Planet, all the people there. Okay, so we start to see what the point of this might be. Although the settings are all the same, each compressor is being triggered at different times because each compressor is listening to a different range of frequencies, and they're all behaving differently. Now, this approach is not something I often, or in fact, I've never used it myself, but I have seen other people use it. I think it's quite interesting. The critics of this approach will say that it can make your mixes rather dull because it just flattens everything out. In my opinion, that would probably happen if you just went overboard with it. But if you wanted to kind of set each band up as a kind of a guardrail for that frequency range, then I can see why this might work. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Which multiband compressor should you use? Well, my suggestion would be to start off with the one you've got. It may well be that your DAW includes a multiband compressor, so I would start off experimenting with that. And a little later down the road, if you find it's lacking in some way or it's got a feature missing, then perhaps look at buying a plugin. A good example of this would be in the DAW that I've been using today, Studio One. They have an included multi-band dynamics plugin. Now, interestingly, note that it's called a dynamics plugin rather than a compressor because it has both compression and expansion capabilities. Now, if you'd like me to make a video about the difference between downwards compression, upwards compression, and expansion, then I will make that video if I get enough comments down below. Moving on, I would look at the one that we've also been looking at today already, which is from iZotope. It's a few different versions of this. I'm using version 9, but 10 and 11 are also available, and they're all reasonably similar, I would say. Just a really good, straightforward multi-band compressor, as you've seen in today's video already. The next one that I've been using, which I think is quite interesting, is from SSL. This is the G3 multi-bus compressor. The difference with this one would be that it does add a little bit of sort of SSL character to the sound. It's not a purely clean multi-band compressor, and if you want to add a little bit of character, then this would be a good one to look at. Another one that I've been looking at is this one from FabFilter. Lots of people are big fans of this, the Pro MB plugin. Now, knowing that I was going to be making this video, I decided to download the trial of this about a week or so ago, and I've been using it, and essentially it's like a multi-band processor on steroids, of course. Now, it has got that nice sort of FabFilter flavor about it. The controls are really good and intuitive. And if you're used to their EQ plugin, for example, like I am, then you'll quickly get into this one. And talking about their EQ plugin, as you may well know, that includes some dynamic bands. It's a dynamic EQ, in fact. And I know many of you are going to ask me, what's the difference between a multi-band compressor and a dynamic EQ? If you think the dynamic bands of a dynamic EQ are quite similar to the bands of a multi-band compressor, then I would say you are right. There can be some slight differences depending on which plugins you use as well. For example, on some dynamic EQ bands, you don't have that much control over how the compression actually behaves. You may not, for example, have a knee control, and until recently with FabFilter, for example, you didn't actually have control over the attack and release. Whereas with a dedicated multi-band compressor, again, depending which plugin you're using, you'll usually have more sort of advanced controls over the compression itself, but you won't have generally any EQ controls. It is a little bit muddy, so I would say that it's a matter of emphasis. If your primary task of that plugin is to EQ this signal, and most of the other bands are regular EQ bands, but you want to have some dynamic control over some parts of EQ, then I would use a dynamic EQ plugin. But if your primary purpose is compression with this plugin, then I would say a dynamic EQ would be the way to go. That's my short answer. If you'd like a more in-depth video about this, let me know in the comments below. So I'd like to give you 3 choices for the next video I should make about compression. Choice number 1, vocal compression, a complete guide, I guess. Choice number 2, parallel compression, and choice number 3, sidechain compression? Let me know your answer in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm Mike. I do hope you're well, and I'll see you in the next video.